Oh boy, today I have something super nice for you, because I hope you've seen that a few weeks back we rebuilt the Code Sandbox projects page. If not, check the video linked up here as well. What we built back then was this amazing page that is actually full of super nice scroll animations. If we look at what we built, we see that this is a page that has a lot of super nice animations just popping up everywhere. We built this the previous time with Framer Motion. However, there was one thing that we actually didn't build yet. And I thought this thing is probably a little bit too complicated to build. And what that thing was that we were actually missing and multiple people have asked for is the avatar animation. The avatar animation looks as follows. As soon as the editor comes into view, you see that there's an avatar popping up on the screen as well. And there's actually two more popping up when you keep on scrolling. Then as soon as this screen is about to disappear, what happens is that there's one avatar that remains into place. And this avatar actually transitions right into the next view. From that point on, that avatar, well, in Code Sandbox version, it starts to move. But that avatar is then part of the next screen. And that is such an amazing animation that lets this avatar move from one view into the other view. And that is what I want to teach you today. And let me tell you, boy, I gained a few more gray hairs for this animation as well. There is so much involved to do this right. I guess if you know mathematics well, you could probably calculate stuff, but for me it was also a lot of trial and error to get everything in the exact same position. And not only do this on one screen size, but also making sure that if you guys have a smaller screen, that it will still end up in the exact same spot. So if I'm quickly gonna make my screen a bit smaller, it should still end up in exactly the same spot. And in this case it does. But let me tell you, it took so much effort to get this right. So sit back and enjoy how we are gonna rebuild this today, because I am super excited. So let's not wait any longer and start the project where we left off before and start adding in this really nice animation. The component we're looking for is the section collaboration, because this section is actually the very first screen and that's what we'll be working on first. The first thing I want to do is add a div that will actually position the avatars on the right side of the screen. So for that, I'm actually gonna add a new div that has a class name of position absolute. We can give it a background of red 300, for example, so you can see what we're doing. And then in here we get the avatars. This absolutely positioned div will be positioned on the right side of the screen and also on the top of the screen. And the next thing we then notice is that now the screen moves, but the avatars still don't. And that is because we also need to nest this wrapper div within our div that is actually scaled and moved. And if we do that, the avatars are positioned in the top right of the screenshot. So next, let's add some avatars in there so things look just a little bit better. I prepared a little bit for them already. What you see here is that this is a motion image, and that's because in a second we'll need to animate them. As well as that I set a very specific width and height based on the viewport. And the reason I'm doing that and not based on a percentage is because if I would use a percentage, it would be relative to the parent that it's positioned within, instead of being relative to the screen size. And I actually want to have this a specific size within the screen size. So this way I can give the images a dynamic width and height, but I still know what it's based on and I can predict how it will look. Whereas 5% would be really small because the wrapper of the avatars isn't that large. Let's add two more. And for that, I actually prepared a few nice colors already, which we use for the border, as well as two different image IDs. And that already gives us the images. Now let's remove that ugly background color and make it flex and give it a gap of 2, so everything is positioned next to each other with a gap in between them. And then instead of positioning them in the top right corner, I actually already prepared a better positioning for them, which is based on a percentage. And the reason for that is because this div is actually directly positioned within the wrapper div that scales based on the image's size. So if I use a percentage here, I still know that it's relative to the size of the image and everything will be positioned in the right place. And also if we make the screen a little bit bigger, we see that everything is still in the right place. I quickly switched to Code Sandbox's live website because what you see is all of the avatars actually fade in one by one. So that's actually the next thing we still have to add. The first thing I will add is an use transform that fades in all of the avatars. So for that, we can create a new variable called const avatar group opacity, which is use transform and also based on the scroll Y progress. And then at 0, it should still be 0% as opacity. Then at 0.35, we're also still at 0 because that is actually the moment we want to start fading in, because that's also the moment when we start moving the screen. And when that animation did complete, I also want to complete the fade in animation. So at that moment, it should actually be 1. So that means that we can copy this avatar group opacity and convert our wrapper div into a motion.div. And then we can add this to the style tag, where we set opacity equal to the avatar group opacity. And then you immediately see that the avatars are not visible anymore. But when we start to scroll, you see that they become visible. They're still all three visible, which is not exactly what we want, but that's the next thing we're gonna fix. And because all three of the avatars fade in at a different time, or they scale up actually, I'm gonna add 3 new variables. The first one I will call avatar1 scale, which is also a use transform. And that should actually, at the exact same time as the group opacity, scale up the first avatar. So that means that at these time slots, it's again 0, 0, and then we'll scale to 1. Oh, and we should of course not forget to pass in the scroll Y progress. And then we see that we have exactly the same time slots, and in this case, we're applying it to the scale instead of an opacity. But if we then copy this scale and set that on our first image, where we can say scale equals avatar1 scale, and we scroll down, we see that now this first image scales in. And we should actually do exactly the same for the second one and the third one as well, but with their own timings. For the second avatar, this should be 0.4 until 0.45. And the third avatar should be 0.6 until 0.65. And then we should of course copy these new scales and set them on the images and do the same thing for the third one. And if we then start scrolling down, we should see that one by one they scale in. Awesome. There is though one more thing that Code Sandbox added, and that is that once one avatar appears, it pushes the rest to the side. And to replicate that, I think it would be okay if we just move the whole group with a certain distance to the left every time one avatar appears. So for that, we're gonna go back to our version again, and I actually prepared a transition on the x-axis. And if we look at this, we see that we have exactly the same timings that we're using for the fading in and the scaling of the avatars. But this time we are actually setting a value on the x-axis, which is a movement from 60 in this case to 0. So what this does is that as soon as one avatar fades in, it will move the whole group by 20 pixels to the left. So that way it looks like when one avatar is joining, the other ones are moved to the left. So we're kind of just faking the behavior. But this way we only need to move the whole group instead of every avatar at the same time. So if we copy this avatar group X, we can go to our group and then add an X translation and on there add the avatar group X. And if we do that and start going back, we see that if one avatar scales down, the others move to the right. So that way, if we go the other way around, it feels like when one avatar appears, the other ones are moved to the left. Which is such a neat effect, I think. And an important thing to note is that I actually on purpose animate from 60 to 0 instead of going from 0 to -60 to move it to the left. Because this way, as soon as I need to transition that specific avatar in a second from one screen to the other, I know that it is right now at its 0 position instead of -60. Because -60 would make it a lot harder to calculate where I exactly need to move everything, because I have these odd numbers to also take into account. So therefore, it's always super smart to animate something from an odd number to 0, if that's a possibility, because that makes other animations dependent on it a lot easier. And as soon as we've added the movement on the x-axis, we actually continue to scroll. And what then should happen is that the middle avatar should stay in place when the next view actually appears. However, within Framer Motion, it's not really possible to do animations based on a scroll position after an element is out of view. So I actually want to have additional room when the first scene is faded out and the second room is fading in. There should be some sort of overlap. But we also want to make sure that, for example, the fading out of the image is still done when the section has actually left the view. So we're kind of wanting both here. So that got me thinking, how could we solve that? So I gave this some time to think, what can we do with this? And I think a pretty neat solution would be the following. What if we would take this height of 300 viewport height and move that to the parent? And then we'll also move the ref to the section, of course, because otherwise our scroll logic wouldn't work anymore. And then we are going to make this component have a height of 420 viewport height, but at the same time have a negative margin of -120 viewport height. So what this then does is this div will still fit for 300 viewport height within this element, but then it will pull itself outside of the parent for 120 viewport height. So that means that there's an overlap of 120 viewport height between this div and the next section. So if we now scroll, we should see that everything is still the same and everything disappears too early. However, if we add, for example, a background of red 300, we can see that this is still there until a specific point, until it's 120 pixels beyond the viewport. And this is then something we can use with Framer Motion, because we can also add a ref to this div, and then we have a second scroll listener that listens to the extra height that this div has. And that then will still get triggered for 120 extra viewport height units. And then you might be wondering, why the 120 or 420? And that is because if we go to the section right underneath it, we see that this section is 800 viewport height. And this section fades in at 15% of that. And 0.15 times 800 is 120. So that is the additional distance I actually want to have to complete my animation of the previous section. So let's remove this background color, and then we're going to create a new ref, which we, for example, call extended ref. And this extended ref is then what we add to this new div. And then we're also going to copy this scroll Y progress, where we add this extended ref. And then we're going to rename this to scroll Y progress, including overlap. So now we have an additional variable that we can also use within our transforms to transform the animation. So the first thing I want to change next is that instead of everything fading out, only the image fades out and the avatars stay in place, because I need them to move them. So if we go back to our collaboration page, we can actually take out this opacity and add it to our main screen. So that means that we should make this a motion.image, and then we can add a style tag on here where we add the opacity. Then we should remove that from the wrapper, of course. And if we do that and refresh, we see that the section fades out, but the avatars stay in place. And if you keep on scrolling, they will move out of view again, like you see here, because that's the end of the extended target. Now, instead of keeping all three of the avatars, we should only keep the center avatar. So that means that we need to scale the other two down to 0 again. And that we can do pretty much from 85% until 90%, where at 85% it's still 1, and at 90% it should become 0. And the same thing goes for the third avatar, where at 85% it's still 1, and at 90% it should become 0. So that way, let me extend this a little bit. So that way, if we start scrolling, we see that 1 appears, 2 appears, and then both of the other ones disappear, where only the center one remains. And now we only have this avatar left. We only need to move this from this position to the new position in the editor. However, we should also keep in mind that if we keep on scrolling, this avatar will disappear again. So what I'm planning to do is I will move this avatar down in the editor, but as soon as it is in place, there's actually another avatar in this image that will actually appear. And that avatar will then replace the other avatar. So then this one can fade out before it gets moved out of view, and it then is replaced with the new one inside the other editor. First, we need to add another avatar inside this image. So this image lives within the same page component or section. And if we go in there, we see that we have a main image screen here. And right underneath this main screen, we can add the avatar that we actually want to show on this screen. So that should again be an absolutely positioned image. And because it's quite a lot of trial and error, I already found out what the right, left, and top position should be. And in this case, it is actually a top of 50%. And the top of 50% is not by accident. The reason I chose a top of 50% is so that the image is exactly positioned in the middle of the screen. Because calculating where the exact middle is of the screen is something that's quite a bit easier to do than any other random position on the screen. So I'm not sure if this is how CodeSandbox did this exactly, but calculating this to me was a lot easier than finding any other random position. So that way I know where I need to move everything to, which is the middle of the screen, and in this case offset it by a specific position because it's inside the editor. But at least I know vertically where I need to find this image. And the next thing to do then is moving this image on top of this other image. And when it's on top, we're actually gonna flip them. So this image in a second shouldn't be visible anymore until the other image is right on top of it. And then we swap visibility between them. And looking at this, you might say we should start moving the avatar right now. But don't be fooled, this avatar is something that's already positioned inside a div again that has a translation on it, because it's actually part of this screen that also moves from left to right. So starting to only transition this avatar would give quite some headaches, simply because if you're moving a translate within another translate, again, you're getting pretty awkward values you need to work with. So instead of moving only the avatar, I'm actually gonna move the whole screen. Only you don't see it because the screen is faded out. But I can quickly show you this screen simply by going back to our opacity transition, which is the opacity that is added on top of the whole screen right here. And we can, for example, set this for now to 0.8, because then we can see what is actually happening right now. This image is still scaled up a lot and positioned in a certain way. And what I want to try to achieve is move this screen in a certain way that will actually be on top of the other avatar. After experimenting with this a lot though, I also noticed that there is something that is actually in our way again. And that has to do with the way these images are sized. Because if we, for example, look at this main screen image, we see that it has a width of auto a height of 75 viewport height, but also a max height that is then connected to the viewport width. So that means I just don't know what value I am working with. It could be anything, but I need to know the exact dimensions of all of the images to be able to position them on top of each other. So that means that we're gonna change this as well. For this main image, which is the image you see here, we're actually gonna remove this and give this a height of auto and a max height of none, and then a width of 70 viewport width. So that way I always know that this image is 70% of the viewport. That's always the case, and the height will simply adjust. And that makes it that I have one single number that I can work with. I always know it's 70% of the viewport. We need to do the same thing to the other section though, because everything again needs to be exactly the same. These images are positioned a little bit different though. Because if you look at this image, it is within a wrapper that is then also moved around. And this then has the height of 75 viewport height and also a max height. So we should remove this and then also make them a width of 50 viewport width. And then for the image, we can make this width full and height auto. But on top of this, we should also make sure that the image is then exactly in the center of this wrapper div as well. Because that way, again, we know it is 50 viewport width and it is again exactly in the center of that div. So we know where it is. So that means that I'm also gonna add a display flex on here and the flex column, because there's items underneath each other, for example, for the text. And then I'm gonna add items center and justify center. And this is then what we're gonna add to the other divs as well, which again would be a width of 50 viewport width, display flex, flex column, justify center and items center. And that is because there's multiple containers for these images, because if we scroll down, you see that there's actually two images on top of each other. So we should again make sure that they're positioned the same. So if we do that, we should also remove this width like we did with the other image, and also make that a width full and a height of auto. And if we now scroll on the website, there's not a lot that has changed. And there shouldn't, because everything should still look exactly the same. But what has changed is probably that these images are maybe like 1% bigger in width or height, something like that. And the main thing is that it became predictable what size they have, simply because we now gave them a fixed width instead of giving them a percentage, but also a max height and a width. And you can see the headache I still have because of that. And when I change that to these fixed sizes, width, 50 viewport width, now I know where I should position them. So now we are at this stage. It is pretty much only a matter of moving this avatar down, left, right to position it at exactly the right spot. First, let's go back to this collaboration page and start adding a movement on the y-axis so we can move things down. For that, I'm going to add a new variable called y, which is useTransform. And then this time we're actually going to use our scroll y progress, including overlap, because we want to move this until the very last moment. And actually, we only want to start moving this when the rest is already out of view. So for that, we can take a starting point of 0.75, because that way we're pretty much at the end of the 300 viewport height. Because 3/4 of this animation is pretty much the end of our target ref. That's about the difference. It's about 25% longer, a little bit more because we are using 420 instead of 400, but that's okay for this animation. And then we want to animate this until the end of that scroller. And what do we want to move down? 50% of the height of the screen. So that means that we should be able to add the starting position of 0 viewport height and then an end position of 50 viewport height. But don't be fooled with this 50, because our element is still sticky at a top of 10 of the viewport height. So this is actually something we have to take into account. So we should only move this for 40 and then we're actually halfway of the screen. So if we copy this Y and then add that Y to the wrapper of the screen, which contains both the image as well as all of the avatars, and we then start scrolling down, we see that now this screen moves down until both of them meet halfway of the viewport. However, our screen is still underneath our div, and that is because the default stacking order just stacks everything that's next to each other on top of each other. So therefore, we still need to add a position relative and a Z10 to our first section. So now it actually moves it over top. And next to the Y, we still need to do two things. We also need to make sure that the X-axis is perfect, but we also need to scale the screen down again, so both of them have the exact same scale. First, let's start with the X position. And for that, we still need to replace our scroll Y progress because the movements we're doing should be including the overlap. So that means we're gonna copy them, and I'm also gonna paste them into the scale already because we're gonna need them there as well. And then I'm gonna change a few values. First, I'm gonna change the X values to viewport width so I have better control of what this percentage means, because the percentage is again relative to something it is in. But making this viewport width already makes it way more predictable what's gonna happen. So that means that I'm gonna replace all of these values with viewport width. And then, because we're now doing something different with the animation than before, I already found out that I actually need to move this to -18 viewport width in order to line this up as soon as the scale is also applied. And next, when scrolling, especially in the beginning, I actually want to move it way further to the left. So it's coming from the left side and kind of follows the line numbers in the auto screen. So that means that instead of -60 viewport width, I'm actually now gonna make this -135. So that way, if we're scrolling down, we see that it now moves way more further to the left. And as soon as I, in a second, also add in the scale, we see that this all lines up. Because right now it still ends with a scale of 2.5. And a scale of 2.5, while this is scaled down. So that does not match. It should actually also go back to a scale of 1. So at the end of this animation, it should be a scale of 1. Which means that if we then move everything, we see that at the last moment, it kind of goes back. But there is something weird happening. And that is because this 2.5 is only resized at the last 5% of the animation. So we should actually make sure that we line all of these animations, also the Y-axis, up at exactly the same time. So for that, I'm gonna update this X of 0.7 also to 0.75. So it's also at the exact same time. And I'm also gonna update this one to 75. And I'm also gonna update the scale to also be at exactly the same time. And if we then scale, we see that there's no weird movement happening anymore because everything happens at exactly the same time. The only thing I still want to change now is actually make this screen a little bit bigger, because right now it goes out of view rather weird and quick. But that is of course because I already set these numbers knowing that I was gonna resize this. Because with a bit of experimentation, I actually found out that if we make this 4.2, it just looks a little bit nicer because the screen becomes a little bit bigger and then flows right into place. But this number doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter what you fill in here. You could also already have it at 1. And that would still make the animation work because everything will line up, but things will just look a little bit different because this number is of a different size. But making it a little bit bigger, in my opinion, looks just a bit smoother and then lines up everything perfectly. The most important thing that actually makes this work is making sure that you use exactly the same timings, the 0.75 for example, to do everything at exactly the same time. because then everything at exactly the same time falls into place. And that's what makes this look so great. And then for exactly this X position, for example, it is -18 now. It took me quite some effort to find out the exact value. And I think if you're maybe really great at mathematics, you could definitely calculate this number and know exactly where it would end. But for me, it was a little bit of trial and error to position it in the right place. However, like I said, it's already a lot easier if you have all of these predictable numbers, like make sure that it's lined up in the center and that everything, for example, the images have a width of 50 viewport width, because that makes it so much easier to line things up. Because I've been messing around with these numbers a lot before I decided to make everything just a little bit easier to grab into my head as well. So now we still need to remove this screen again and make this opacity 0. And then we can already enjoy this view. And you see that the image is bigger and then it falls right into place. So let's first make sure that we fade out this image and also only fade in the underlying avatar when it needs to. To start, I'm gonna add one more variable called const avatar to opacity, which is again a use transform. And for that use transform, we're again using the progress including overlap. And then in this case, only at the very last moment, so I'm gonna make this 0.999 until 1. Then it should go from opacity 1 to opacity 0. Because, and I still haven't added it, but if we wouldn't do this, you would see that the image would move up again because it's still there and it gets pulled away by its parent because it's scrolled out of view. So in order for that, we need to, as soon as we're at the end of this animation, fade out this avatar. So that we can do by adding another opacity prop to the second avatar that is equal to the avatar opacity. So that way, the image is still there, but once we scroll down, we see that it fades out. And we should do the exact same, or actually the exact opposite, for this other image. So in that other page, we're gonna create a new variable called avatar opacity. That is use transform, and that takes in the scroll Y progress. Then in this case, I'm gonna do something similar to what I did with the position because there's only one value that we need. And then we're gonna say if the position is larger than, in this case, the fade in end. So that is the 15% the other section overlaps. So if it's larger than animation order dot fade in end, then it should be 1 and otherwise it should have opacity 0. So then we copy this opacity and add that to our avatar by adding style opacity is avatar opacity. And then if we make this a little bit bigger and then start scrolling down, we see that initially this second avatar is not visible anymore. Until we scroll all the way down, then the top avatar gets into place, but actually fades out and gets immediately replaced with the second avatar. So they're swapping each other out at exactly the same moment. And that is because this fade in end 0.15 or 15% was exactly the same as the 120 viewport height we set our first section to overlap. So that way, when we are at the end of the first section, we're also at 15% within this next section. And that means that if we at that moment swap these two images out, they're actually replacing each other. So if we now keep on scrolling, the avatar we're seeing is simply the avatar that is part of the second screen. Until we start scrolling back up again, then they replace each other again and we're actually seeing the first avatar. And then everything moves into place again. And that brings us at the end of today's video. I hope that making this scroll animation didn't have too many mathematics or maybe even like random numbers involved for you. And I really hope you could be able to follow along. Because I think it's absolutely a more complicated topic to make this animation and things might go pretty quick. But don't be fooled, I think it took me maybe 6 to 8 hours to really fine tune this animation and make sure that everything works and do a lot of trial and error. These types of animations just take a lot of time and a lot of trial and error. It's not possible to make this perfect in one go. You're trying a lot of different things, a lot of different sizes, a lot of different numbers, until you end up with something that's 95% perfect. But that's okay, because this is something that's more of a creative process and doesn't really have any strict rules. And on top of that, if you look at the code, it's also most of the time something that's used for example, a marketing page, something that doesn't need to be programmed in the best way possible. It doesn't need the most structured code because most of the time it's something you build once and then it will stay that way. It's not something you need to maintain very long, so it's okay if there's also some numbers in there that you can't really explain but just seem to work. It's totally fine. So absolutely go explore this code. The link is down in the description like always. Just play around with it, test those numbers, see what it does, and maybe even come up with a totally different way to build this based on the things I told you today. And like you can see, the light behind me already went out, so I guess that means this is the end of the video, and that's absolutely true. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you learned something. Let me know if you did learn something, if there's anything I can improve as well. And absolutely check out the links down below where you can find links to both the code as well as a live example of what we just built, plus a link to my Discord, where I also really would love to see you. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.